Hey guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is a show where I review all the comics I've read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between. And before I get started, at the end of the video, we talk about the viewer's pick of the week, so in the comments below, let me know your pick of the week for a chance to be featured on the episode. Let's get started. We had a pretty hefty haul with 14 books this week, and number 14 for me is Titans issue 21. I do feel like this book has slowed down and really has been kind of repetitive. A lot of the story is the team is against each other, and we don't actually get to see them as a family and get to see them work together. And here it's Psycho Pirate going up against the Titans, so of course they're all kind of going against each other because of his power, and then already knowing that he's connected to Deathstroke, and they're like, we gotta go get Deathstroke, which obviously we've seen before. This one's kind of on the fence for me at how long I'm gonna keep the title. I think the artwork is okay. I think sometimes the facial expressions are a little weird, but I do think it needs to find a little bit of its own identity here. So giving that 2 stars, and that is number 14. Moving on to number 13, surprised to see this so low, Miles Morales Spider-Man issue 31. I just thought this crossover was going on for too long. I do feel like this would have been a tighter 2-issue crossover to have it tie in twice in each series. I don't think was completely necessary. I also feel like the level of your enjoyment will come from if you're reading Miles Morales or not. This does feel very much more focused on the events going on in Miles, which I haven't been able to get into as much, even as a Miles fan. I just like the Deadpool stuff a little bit more, which is weird because I am more of a Miles Morales fan than a Deadpool fan. So we'll see. We'll see where it ends up going with Miles' story, but with the crossover, I just thought it tied in a little bit too much into his villains that weren't as interesting to me. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 13. Moving on to number 12, which is Archie Is Mr. Justice, issue 3. This is an Archie book, so I believe they're still doing stuff through Diamond, so I had to read this one digitally. This is Betty's side of the story, and it really is a side of a story. It is an exposition issue where we get to be like, hey, this is how I found out Archie is Mr. Justice, and this is my story about that. And it is very explaining, which is why this is lower. There's elements I liked about it. I like, Betty kind of saving the day at a certain point. I liked her metal arm, I thought was interesting, but for the most part, it was a little too explainy for me. I think we could have shown instead of told a little bit more on this issue. So giving that one 2.5 stars, and that is number 12. Moving on to number 11, which is Zatanna issue 2. I like the first issue because I like that it focused on a different side of Zatanna that we didn't see in that Black Label book, which I loved. I loved the Black Label book. This one definitely leaned a little bit more into the magic stuff. I liked the illusion aspect of that first issue, and here it felt more of the magic aspect, and it has a lot of her supporting characters. I kind of just want to see Zatanna, and that's what I liked about the Black Label book. It was very much in her head, and it was very much a character story that I'm not getting as much here. I will give it another issue and see where it goes, but I do think it's maybe a little bit too much heavy on the magic side of DC instead of just making it a Zatanna story. I did like the cliffhanger, though, with her and Bruce and this like kind of old WandaVision thing going on. I thought that was interesting. Moving on to number 10, which is Out of Alcatraz, issue 1. I just thought that was an interesting concept of how do you escape a prison that's surrounded by water. I liked the concept. I liked even the plot. I thought it was interesting of how they escaped and the things surrounding it. The characters, on the other hand, were very bland, and that's why I couldn't really bring this higher. I even liked the kind of watercolor feeling of the book. It just like the characters for me, that's what wasn't here, and for me that's a very important aspect for me to want to continue a book or to enjoy a book. So giving that 3 stars, and that's number 10. Moving on to number 9, I thought this would be a lot higher, and that's Saga issue 72. We're back on a hiatus. We don't know how long it is, and pretty much the ending of the book where you get to see the letters, they're like, we don't know how long it'll be either, but hopefully it won't be 10 years to finish this story. In this issue, it's very much about the first few words of the issue where Prince Robot, he's like, hey, this is what's going on. We are taking ourselves out of the war, and no one knows what that really means, and everyone reacts to that. And really, you don't get a lot of information because of it, because again, like there's the statement, but there's not really the aftermath of that. Just again, people reacting to it, which honestly slowed down the issue, especially knowing that there's gonna be a very long hiatus. Like I kind of wanted to know what that means. And I feel like this was teased as like, this is going to be as big as the Marco death, and it definitely didn't feel that way. Honestly, I don't even know if it felt as big as some of the more character-driven issues. So we'll hopefully not have to wait 2 years for the next issue, but I do feel like this kind of ended a little bit on a simmer to get into a most likely long hiatus. So giving that one 3 stars, and that is number 9. Moving on to number 8, which is Question Along the Watchtower, issue 5. This is the penultimate issue. I will say, because this is 6 issues, it does feel like it's losing its pacing a bit, especially because we already know who the villain is and we already know the mystery of the book. You're kind of leaning more into the action. But there's a lot of good character moments in here. I love the art. I think the artwork really works very well for this book, and it's very clean. And I like the Renee and Batwoman moments. I even like Renee interact with Animal Man. I thought that was really cool. And just like those characters you normally don't see on a monthly basis, and just like checking in on them, I thought was a good use of the page count. But I also just don't know if this necessarily needed to be 6 issues. So giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 8. Moving on to number 7. I feel like this is a controversial issue, and that's Detective Comics issue 1095, or a controversial story. Because you have retcon a little bit of Batman's origin story, and anytime you kind of touch Batman origin story and any long-term character's origin story, like either people are going to love it or hate it. And for me, I'm kind of on the fence, and what happens here is the idea that Joe Chill was maybe a little less of a mysterious man than he actually is. So, and we got that from the beginning of the arc, and now we're really touching upon it, where Thomas Wayne saved Joe Chill. We're uncovering if Joe Chill knew that or not. Supposedly he didn't. And now we also have Joe Chill's daughter that's involved. And again, these are elements we knew in previous issues that come to a head in this issue. And yeah, as a Batman fan, I do like the idea that Joe Chill's just this random guy that so happened to kill Bruce's family. But then on the other side of things, it is interesting to see something new with a character that we know. And I like the artwork a lot. I think the dialogue was good, but it's definitely a book I'm a little bit on the fence with, as, you know, I think Batman purists are going to be like, don't do this. And then, you know, there is an interesting story to it, but is it interesting enough to kind of play around with something that is so concretely in Bruce's and Batman's origin story? So yeah, on the fence. We'll see what they end up doing with it. But I'm going to give that 3.5 stars, and that is number 7. Moving on to number 6, which is Cable Loving Chrome, issue 3. This one just is an under-the-radar, fun book. If you're a Cable fan, I think you'll definitely love it. I like Cable a lot, so I enjoy the story. But even if you're not, it's a cool romance story between these two characters having to deal with this disease. And we get to see that weave through the issue, and you get some good emotional pull throughout the issue. I do think the artwork at times is a little grittier than I think the story actually is, but I like it. I think it's a fun romance story, which you don't really get to see from superhero comics very often, and I think it's a good Cable story. I think he's very much in character, and we're seeing his story continue, which again, a character that doesn't always have a miniseries or an ongoing series constantly at Marvel. So giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 7. Oh, that was number 6. This is number 5. You Never Heard of Me, issue 3, I believe we're up to. This is just a really fun series. If you're looking for a fun indie book, it's about this guy who could kind of tell the future, but only the bad future, and we get to see this kid who is probably gonna die, and then our main character and their friend is trying to figure out, like, how does he die? Like, let's protect him. And you get to see some interweaved interpersonal stuff throughout the issue that just makes for fun character and fun plot. A cool book to have, a palate cleanser for maybe some of the darker books that came out this week. So giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 5. Moving on to number 4, which is, believe it or not, Exceptional X-Men issue 7 made it to number 4. This issue, honestly, the reason why it was a little lower is because I do feel like they kind of try to shoehorn the Manhunter, I think it's Manhunter, the Manhunt with Professor Xavier. He's like in the middle of the issue, like, oh my God, something happened with Professor X, and everyone kind of reacts to it. And then the rest of the issue is focusing on the one character from Exceptional X-Men, which I feel like they kind of dealt with a lot in the last issue, so to have a whole nother issue without really having that much from Emma and Kitty or any of the other X-Men characters or even the newer characters, I thought you know, maybe was too far when it came from the pacing. But I like a lot of the emotional themes that come out of it, of this guy kind of being tricked by the thing we've always see with the X-Men, and then finding out again, it's a classic story. It's Mr. Sinister behind it all. So I like seeing in a modern lens, the classic story of like, are they good? Are they good? I'll trust them. And then obviously they're the bad mutants. So I like that. I enjoyed that story. And again, the artwork is great, but I do think this was one of the weaker issues for a run that's been pretty perfect for me. All right, moving on to number 3, which is Last Boy issue 1, a book I kind of got on whim, and I'm glad I did. You know, I think it's hard to tell different stories with these public domains because they've kind of been told before. And this one is the aftermath of what you know from Peter Pan. So Wendy is getting married, but it's like a fixed marriage, and all she wants to do is be a writer, but she has the troubles of her family behind her. And then what I thought was really interesting about Peter Pan, the difference here, was that usually it's the idea of like he never wants to grow up, and his surroundings haven't grown up either. But the difference here is, yeah, even Neverland has to grow up, and we get to see the Native American tribe making peace with Captain Hook. And Captain Hook's like, yeah, I'm an old man now, I don't really want to do anything. And Peter Pan doesn't trust him and then kills Captain Hook, and you're like, wow, things are starting to get serious. And it was just an interesting twist, again, on a tale we've kind of seen before with interesting art, good art, and it made me want to pick up issue 2, as someone who's not even that big of a Peter Pan fan. So giving that 4 stars, and that is number 3. Moving on to number 2, it is the topic of the video. Absolute Flash is worth putting on your pull list. Yeah, it's pretty high up there. I've actually enjoyed most of the Absolute titles. We are getting to the second wave of a lot more Absolute titles, so we'll see if every Absolute title should be picked up. But as of right now, I'm enjoying all of them. And Absolute Flash, I like the artwork especially. I felt like I was watching a movie, honestly, where in a really interestingly edited movie, and almost like this kind of, I don't know, I feel like Back to the Future flair to it. I don't know why I kind of go to that, but that's kind of what the vibe felt to me. Maybe it's the super speed, but yeah, I liked the vibe of this book. And we get to see Wally dealing with his not having friends and his hard-ass dad, and him trying to create a relationship with Barry. And you know, one wrong move made Barry die, and this is how Wally gets his powers. And you get to see back and forth of after the accident, before the accident, and I think it built an interesting issue. I'm obviously very curious about the supporting cast, because that's going to be very important as we go along. If he's just kind of talking to nobody, I don't know where the series takes me. And I don't know if this was as strong as like Absolute Batman's start, or even where Absolute Superman went for me, but I think it's a good start. And like I said, I think the artwork is really what brought it up to me, where there are some parts of this story that were a little simmered. It took its time a little bit, which is weird to say for a speedster book, but it definitely hooked me in and made me feel like I wanted this book, even though there's all these other Absolute titles, because it felt different from a regular Flash book, but also felt different from the other Absolute titles, because it's from a younger perspective. So yeah, I say add it to your pull list, but let me know if you feel like there's too many Absolute books, or if this one was as strong as the other ones. Speaking of Absolute, my pick of the week was Absolute Batman issue 6, and I really thought this one picked up for me, because you really get to see some interesting movement to the characters. And honestly, not even just Batman. I really like to see Martha, and I like seeing Alfred. Alfred's relationship with his daughter, a character that was introduced in Scott Snyder's Batman run in the regular continuity, and seeing how different that relationship is. And also, I think Martha's the most interesting character of this series, because she's the one, you just don't know where you're gonna take her. Is she gonna be a vigilante? Is she just gonna be Bruce's mom? There's so many different, is she gonna die? You know, there's so many different directions you could take a character that wasn't meant to be, right? Like, she's always been dead in every other story. So to see her personality grow and to see what type of character she is, that's the most interesting part of Absolute Batman for me. And that's what I felt like was very delivered here, where you do get to see her a little bit of a badass, and get to see her future a little bit more, all while analyzing the past of Bruce's dad dying and how she felt of it. So, and obviously you get some Joker, Bane stuff in the end. So I just thought it built the characters interestingly, and it makes me interested to see what the next breath of this book's going to be now that this first arc is over. And the whole identity of Batman and, you know, why he's Batman has been, I feel like, explained through narrative. That's been a big focus of this book. So now I think we could kind of take the next step. So giving that one 4 stars, that is my pick of the week. Let me know in the comments below what your pick of the week was. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Last week's viewer pick of the week was X Factor, and here are some comments about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.